Babylon 5 is a franchise that began with a pilot movie in 1993, followed by a series proper in 1994. The show's writing, particularly the pacing, setup, and payoffs, character development, moments, world building, and ability, for the most part, to give the audience satisfying resolutions if not complete closure, was impressive and groundbreaking. The show is even more of a standout when you look at the circumstances of its original broadcast home. The series ran for 4 seasons on the Primetime Entertainment Network, P10. If you've never heard of the network, it is no surprise. Only 2 series ran for the life of the network from 1993 to 1997, Babylon 5 and Kung Fu. The legend continues. Babylon 5 finished its 5th season on cable network TNT, which was owned by Time Warner, which also owned Warner Brothers Domestic Television, the subsidiary responsible for the P10 network. The fact that an obscure science fiction show that began on a fledgling not network was able to finish its run and develop a cult following was primarily due to the work ethic and determination of one man, series creator, executive producer, and writer J. Michael Straczynski. Since the 80s, he had been interacting with fans on various news groups online, and he certainly did so for the run of the show. He ate, breathed, and slept Babylon 5. Much of what made Babylon 5 so appealing, in addition to its science fiction setting, was its reliance on historical allegories and, sometimes, references. Different people take away different messages from different productions. My main takeaway from Babylon 5 the series was that it was a cautionary tale of maintaining vigilance against enemies both external and internal. How do we define enemies in this case? Those who want to destroy the freedom to choose and assert their own ideology as the only path for all of society. One example of these historical allegories is the resurgence of the Centauri Republic. In the pilot, Londo Mollari laments the state of the Republic. It is no longer the powerhouse it once was. Compare this to the German Weimar Republic, set up after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, and the resentment the treaty brought about in many Germans. Germany was a shell of its former empire, with economic ruin and hard times the order of the day. Such an environment is ripe for exploitation and, when joined by the building of careful political alliances, regime change, and a new direction for government. Of course, such changes are also accompanied by the removal of obstacles such as the sitting leaders. Just as Prime Minister Malachi was murdered by the forces of and plotting by Lord Rifa shortly before Emperor Turhan died of natural causes, Germany's Knight of the Long Knives eliminated many of the political opponents of the incoming National Socialist faction, including the former Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher. President Paul von Hindenburg, while not a member of the National Socialist Party, was all too accommodating to them, allowing most of what they wanted to do until his death. We see the same with the Centauri government. Retaking territory is usually a popular notion in those scenarios, and the capture of Quadrant 14 by the Centauri is no exception. Shifting gears to Earth, there was the Nightwatch, an official snitch organization created to enable citizens to report subversive activities. The armband is not a new invention for the show. The Soviet Dobrovolna Narodna Druzhina, the Voluntary People's Guard, were very similar armbands. In theory, these forces were community assistance to police forces, non-violently opposing quote-unquote hooliganism. The problem is that such a term was widely defined by the Soviets, up to and including dissidents. Although such history is not widely distributed, deeper research will show that these goon squads would attempt to enforce Soviet lifestyle and crack down on what they called radio hooliganism, read broadcasting anti-Soviet material. As with anything Soviet, despite the name, the squads were not strictly voluntary. They had quotas to meet. As we saw in the 3rd season of Babylon 5, Nightwatch attempt to confiscate signs they considered to be seditious. Fast forward to current day, and we have a constant struggle for the right to free expression. The harassment of shop owners by city council members, fights to maintain unpopular political signs, and big tech all too willing to collude with special interest groups to decide what is and is not misinformation. In addition, snitch lines in relation to the pandemic have been set up by various municipalities. This one is particularly chilling. Illegal gatherings, excluding parks. Please call the Toronto Police non-emergency line for any complaints related to illegal gatherings of people not from the same household, and one person who lives alone. We have hate and bias being redefined and taught in public schools as official propaganda. Remember the Clark-era interstellar news network? Look at that word, misinformation. All the while, most of the mainstream media wholly support the expansion of state power, as seen here by The Hill. Even worse, many citizens openly support the dismantling of free speech on the grounds of civility. Remember those Biden signs from earlier in the video? Here is a take and a letter to the New York Times by Jonathan Ogle of Piedmont, California. If she can't express her views in a civil manner, civil society should turn its back on her until she can show some community spirit. Some would decry this solution as cancel culture. I would cheer it as community culture. The rank hypocrisy is apparent here, crying for civility while acting in a most uncivil manner, calling for the bullying of someone in order to silence them. The good news is that there are small victories and we must celebrate them and learn how to use the momentum to create more victories from them. We also need to learn not just from history, but art, including storytelling in works such as Babylon 5 in 1984 by George Orwell. Orwell's novel also had a ministry of peace, although the function was not exactly the same as that of the agency from Babylon 5. There was an historical allegory, the abandonment of allies to tyranny on the false hope of the promise of peace from the tyrants. Observe the words of Mr. Lance and Neville Chamberlain, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
We will, at last, know peace in our time.
And we are determined to continue our efforts to remove possible sources of difference and thus to contribute to assure the peace of Europe. As Chamberlain abandoned Eastern Europe to Germany, so did Earth abandon the Narn to the Centauri. Chamberlain's successor, Winston Churchill, said this of neutral countries. Each one hopes that if he feeds the crocodile enough, the crocodile will eat him last. All of them hope that the storm will pass before their turn comes to be devoured. After we learn from history and understand the cautionary tales from storytelling, there is only one thing left to do: fight. But first we must learn, and first we must understand. Watch Babylon 5.